So, I should probably start off with a brief definition of what is meant by time setting. So, time setting refers to the attempt to say that, for example, the second coming is going to take place on a particular day perhaps in a month, in a particular year. So time setting refers to when people try to give specific dates for final events. Everything from, as I mentioned last night, from the outpouring of the latter rain to the national Sunday law to the close of probation and most commonly the second coming of Jesus. So what we are going to be looking at is what Mrs. White has to say about that, and also how this occurred within our history and how God used her to respond to time setting that took place within our church. So you may remember yesterday that we looked at the nature of God issue, the Trinity debate within our church, and we ended off by saying that we have nothing to fear in the sense that from the history of the nature of God, that great debate that was taking place, we saw that God preserved our doctrinal purity on that point. We saw that Satan tried to use fanatics in the 1840s and 1850s, as well as John Harvey Kellogg, one of the most brilliant minds our church has ever seen and known. And God protected, defended the church in that time of great crisis. And the assurance that we have is that God, in like manner, will guide us through the doctrinal issues that we are facing today, and we are facing many. So today, what we are going to look at is the fact that you and I have nothing to fear from date setters either. Right, from those who come presenting dates for final events, whether it's the outpouring of the latter rain or the second coming, we have nothing to fear from these dates that are being set. And like Brother Loaho mentioned when we started this convocation off, this is not to lull us into a state of sleep, right? This is not to present the idea that Jesus' coming is far off in the future, but we also don't want to fall into the fanaticism of time setting, which we will look at as we go through this lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by looking at time setting that took place within other churches. In other words, this is not exclusive, or this is not a problem that Adventists alone have, as we will see. And then we'll focus most of our time on time setting within the Adventist church, starting off by looking at the time setting that took place during Ellen White's own lifetime. And then we'll look at the time setting that took place after her death, including contemporary issues. And then we'll look at how Ellen White explained and understood the phrase found in Revelation 10, where the mighty angel said, "There shall be time no longer." And then we'll spend a brief moment looking at some objections and then some dangers of time setting, and then we'll conclude this message, which is essentially part one of a two-part presentation that I have. So let's look at time setting as it has occurred in other churches. So essentially, this problem of time setting is almost as old as the Christian church itself. There was a man who was known as Irenaeus. He was a church father, as they call them, one of the early prominent figures in the Christian church. And he predicted that Jesus would come in the year AD 550, right, in the first century. So he made that prediction all the way back in the 6th century, a long, long time ago. And then after that, there wasn't much time setting until the Reformation era. The first and most famous of these was Sir Isaac Newton, who, in addition to being a scientist, he was also a student of Bible prophecy. And interestingly, I haven't actually looked at how he calculated this, but he predicted that Jesus would come in the year 2060. Right? So that's probably the longest range prediction that we have. So that was Sir Isaac Newton. And then a well-loved and highly respected reformer, the leader of the Methodist Church, John Wesley, also interestingly predicted that Jesus would come in the year 1836. And then another famous movement, the Jehovah's Witnesses, who came into existence in the 19th century, a very prominent movement nowadays. The founder of this movement, C.T. Russell, Charles Taze Russell, he predicted that Jesus would come in the year 1874. And then also, quite famously, the Jehovah's Witnesses as a movement, still to this day, teach that Jesus did come in the year 1914, but he came spiritually. They teach that when it says that every eye shall see him, that passage is being figurative because it's found in the book of Revelation. So basically, again, the point is that this is not new to Adventists. Mormons as well, otherwise known as the Latter-day Saints, their founder, Joseph Smith, predicted that Jesus would come in 1891. And then we have some more modern examples. You have a movement known as the Radio Church of God. Their leader, Herbert Armstrong, gave several predictions for the end of the world. He first of all said that Jesus would come in 1935. Then he changed the date to 1943, then once again in 1972, and finally in 1975. And we'll talk about this more, but people, his followers, the adherents to his church, when they kept on seeing his predictions failing, many of them eventually lost all confidence in him, and they actually ended up leaving the church altogether. And then one I have a personal experience with, Harold Camping, an American, very prominent radio broadcaster. He predicted that Jesus would come on the 21st of May in 2011. And I remember just 10 days before that, on the 11th of May, I think it was, I was heading from UCT to the nearest train station. And as I was approaching there, someone came up to me, a woman, with a very startled look in her eyes, with a pamphlet in her hand, and handed me it. And she said, "Please read this. Jesus is coming soon, soon, soon." And then she almost ran away from me. And when I read it, it was basically a series of prophecies that Harold Camping had put together based on the days of Noah, and was teaching that Jesus was going to come on the 21st of May. And people were selling their homes, they were selling their businesses, they were selling everything and donating to this cause. And unfortunately, as we know, obviously it didn't happen. And then recently, a man called Kent Hovind, who is highly respected in some circles for his work in opposing evolutionary theory, standing for the young Earth idea, which is what we believe as Adventists, that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, or round about that age. And I can't remember the year now, but he predicted that Jesus would come, it will be coming in the year 2028, and this is based on his understanding of the Feast of Trumpets. So again, what we are getting from this is that time setting is not unique to the Adventist church. There is quite a lot of it that has gone on outside of our ranks. Now, let's move on to time setting that has taken place within the Adventist church. So we'll start off by looking at the early time setting that took place during the life of Mrs. White. And most famously, there was the Millerite movement, right? We know that they set dates, initially 1843, and then they shifted it to 1844, and finally settled on the specific date of October 22, 1844. And interestingly, when you read the history about William Miller, he was a man who was rather reluctant to set a date. But in any case, we know the history, we know the story. God had a purpose in allowing this date setting to go on. And the last official date setter within the Millerite movement was Samuel Snow, who helped the Advent movement, the Millerite movement, to come to the date of 1844. And he did so based on an ancient Jewish calendar. And we know that they got the time and the date correct, but they got the event wrong, right? And as a result of this, when the date passed, when 1844, October 22 passed, there were several groups that split, that separated out of this particular movement. The first of these was those who basically completely and utterly rejected Christianity altogether. They rejected the Bible, they rejected God, they became basically atheists. The second group actually formed into groups such as the Advent Christian Church, and they basically just disassociated themselves. They said, we want nothing to do with prophecy, we want nothing to do with end-time events. We just believe that Jesus is coming sometime, but we don't know when. And they called themselves the Advent Christian Church. So that was a second group that split out of the Millerites. Then you have movements that decided that what was wrong was not the event, but the time. The date was the problem. And so what they did is that they kept on setting more and more dates. And some believe, I am yet to actually confirm this, but some believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses were actually a part of this group, that Charles Taze Russell was actually a part of this group. He was influenced by this particular group. So anyways, the fourth and final group is where our ancestors come from, and that is those who followed the ideas set forth by Hiram Edson, the man who discovered that the cleansing of the sanctuary was not a reference to the destruction of the earth at the second coming, but that it was a change in Christ's ministry. It was the beginning of the judgment hour that was being performed in heaven's temple. And eventually, as we know, as I've alluded to, this group eventually formed into what is now today known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So this group, instead of setting another date, instead of saying that the date was wrong, they realized that the event was wrong, but the date was correct, right? Which it is. So within that group, the fourth group that eventually became the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there was a man that I mentioned yesterday, Joseph Bates. Joseph Bates was a man in many ways ahead of his time. He was the Adventist movement's first health reformer, and in many ways he was a deep scholar of the Bible. But he actually happened to fall into time setting. And you find this in one of the biographies, the first volume, a biography on the life of Ellen White by Arthur White. And notice it says in 1850, Joseph Bates, entirely on his own initiative, so no one motivated him or encouraged him to do this, published a pamphlet on the sanctuary in which he sparked a time-setting rash. A statement on pages 10 and 11 reads, so now Arthur White is quoting Joseph Bates's little pamphlet. It says, "The 7 spots of blood on the golden altar and before the mercy seat I fully believe to represent the duration of the judicial proceedings on the living saints in the most holy." So what is he saying here? He is speaking about when the priest would go into the sanctuary with blood and he would sprinkle it on certain parts of the sanctuary. And this would be done 7 times. And what he's saying is that he said those 7 times, each of them represents a year. So 1 sprinkle, that's 1 year. 2 sprinkles, that's 2 years, and so on and so forth. That's what he's saying. And it says, all of which time they will be in their affliction, even 7 years, right? So again, every sprinkle of blood represents a year. God by his voice will deliver them, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. Then the number 7 will finish the day of atonement, not redemption. 6 last months of this time, I understand, Jesus will be gathering in the harvest with his sickle on the white cloud. So essentially what he was saying is that 7 years after 1844, 7 years after the cleansing of the sanctuary began, when Jesus' work began, he said 7 years is what we have for Jesus to finish his work of cleansing the sanctuary and of cleansing his people. Once those 7 years are up, Jesus is going to come. In fact, he says in the last 6 months of those 7 years, Jesus will come and gather his people. So Ellen White responded, as she usually did, and she says, "Dear brethren, the Lord has shown me that the message of the third angel must go and be proclaimed to the scattered children of the Lord." And now notice she says, "and it should not be hung on time." That is, the message that you and I have as a people, she's speaking, she's saying, it is not to be based on time, referring to what Joseph Bates was doing. "For time will never will be a test again. I saw that some were getting a false excitement arising from preaching time, that the third angel's message was stronger than time can be. I saw that this message can stand on its own foundation and that it needs not time to strengthen it, and that it will go in mighty power and do its work and will be cut short in righteousness." Right? So what is Ellen White saying here? She was saying that Joseph Bates was mistaken into thinking that there is another prophetic time period after 1844. And she says that the problem with this is that it creates a false sense of excitement, that people tend to get more focused upon the date than upon the message. And she says, our message is strong enough. The message itself will get people excited enough. It will get the right response. We don't need to add any more dates to it, is what she's saying. She says, I saw that some were making everything bend to the time of this next fall. That is, this next autumn, right? So she was writing in 1850. She says, that is making their calculations in reference to that time. I saw that this was, what did she say? This was wrong. For this reason, instead of going to God daily to know their present duty, they look ahead and make their calculations as though they knew the work would end this fall or this autumn without inquiring their duty of God daily. So essentially what she's saying here is that people were essentially becoming neglectful of their spiritual duties and of going out and preaching the gospel and so on, because they were thinking that Jesus is surely going to come on this particular date, which was 1851, in the autumn of 1851. So what's interesting is that what she's saying here, do you notice how she says, I saw that some were making everything bend to the time of this next fall? What she's basically saying is people who time set have a habit of trying to twist the scriptures and twist historical events to make sure that everything happens on their particular chosen date, right? In other words, they try to make everything fit their predictions, which is dishonest, right? It's actually a dishonest way of studying the Bible. So fortunately, eventually, Joseph Bates, being an honest man, when he heard this reproof from Ellen White, he actually changed. He dropped the date. It says, with the publications of the view given to Ellen White and James White's clear-cut statement, Joseph Bates and others who had taken up the time message dropped it in the summer, that is about 3 months before, of 1851. So fortunately, Joseph Bates, when he was corrected, he stopped his time setting. However, unfortunately, there was a man by the name of Stephen Smith. This man was actually convinced by the message of Joseph Bates. He was convinced that indeed in 1851 Jesus was going to come. And when he heard the warnings from Mrs. White, he rejected it on the basis that he didn't believe in Ellen White as a prophet. And so essentially, when Mrs. White wrote against him, he became even more determined to resist what Ellen White was saying, to resist her authority. He actually went to churches throughout a particular part of the United States, trying to get the people to no longer believe in Ellen White because she was disagreeing with the date. And eventually, this man caused so much havoc that it was recommended that he be disfellowshipped, separated from the Adventist church. And so what we learn from this is that in the minds of the church, of our early church fathers, the pioneers, time setting was so serious, it was so deadly to the spirituality of the church that it was worthy of disfellowship. Think about that, right? That's a pretty serious thing to do, right? To separate someone, to cause them to lose their church membership because they are engaged in promoting time setting. Now, when you look at the story of Stephen Smith, what we find is that time setting, just like most errors, is associated with other errors. In the case of Stephen Smith, there was a rejection of church order. He was rejecting all forms of church order, church leadership, including the authority of Ellen White. And that's often the case. Oftentimes, people who embrace time setting also fall a prey to other strange doctrines that are coming in. And the influence of this time setting in the 1850s caused people to lose all confidence in the three angels' messages. And as you go on and you read Ellen White's other counsels, that's what you see happening over and over again. So Ellen White, referring to these time setters, but she wrote this about 20 years later, she says, many who have called themselves Adventists have been time setters. Time after time, that is date after date, has been set for Christ to come, but repeated failures have been the result. So what has happened? The people are not satisfied with setting one date. They set one date and that doesn't happen, but they don't see that as a sign to stop. They almost are like addicted to time setting. So they set more and more dates. And she says, what is the result? Repeated failures. The definite time of our Lord's coming is declared to be beyond the ken or the knowledge of mortals. And then she goes on to talk about not even angels have an idea when Jesus is coming. So again, early on, in the early days of our church, you see Ellen White rising up and clearly saying that time setting is not something that we as a people are to engage in. So then we move on to later episodes of time setting. This is from the 1870s all the way through to the end of the 1890s. So there was some kind of silence, inactivity amongst the time setters. After that episode in 1851, there wasn't any more time setting until about 1879 or 1880. So in essence, the rebukes and the counsels of Ellen White, they worked for some time. The people were like, okay, let's stop doing this. This is not a good idea. But then for some reason, in 1879 or 1880, this desire to set times and to set dates eventually was rekindled. Ellen White says, I am compelled to state that I have not had the least faith in Mr. Garmeyer or his work. So there was a man called Mr. Garmeyer going around and teaching something that she did not approve of. The pamphlet that was issued last fall or autumn at the time of our Jackson camp meeting had not the least sanction of our people. So what was going on is that there was this man called Mr. Garmeyer who was going to Adventist camp meetings and handing out pamphlets that he had printed, which were teaching something that she says our people did not approve. Now, what is she talking about? They were sent broadcast by stealing the Review and Herald list. So basically what this guy did is he snuck into the Review and Herald and he got a list of all the addresses of all the people who had subscribed to the Review and Herald periodical. And what he did is he got all their addresses and then he sent all his pamphlets to all of these people. And they thought that it was coming from the Review and Herald. In other words, they thought it was an official Adventist viewpoint and teaching. So the daughter of Mr. Garmeyer, the guy who's doing this, claims, or he claims for her, to have visions. So not only was he handing out these pamphlets with false teachings, but his daughter was also claiming to be a prophet. It says, she claims to have visions, but they bear not the stamp of God. They are of the same character as many such things as we have met in our experience. What does she call it? A delusion of Satan. Now notice this. I plainly stated at the Jackson camp meeting to those fanatical parties that they were doing the work of the adversary of souls. So whose work were they doing? The work of Satan. Now what work was Mr. Garmeyer doing? What was he actually teaching through these pamphlets? They were in darkness. They have claimed to have great light about what? That probation would close on October 1884. Right? So what were they teaching? That probation would close in 1844. So what did Ellen White say about this? This does not have the sanction of our people. This is not approved of by God. Going around and teaching that the close of probation is going to happen on a specific date, she says, is doing the work of Satan. And this man was claiming to do the work of God, and he was claiming that his daughter was a prophet. Right? Then in 1887, about 7 or 8 years later, the time setting issue spread from the United States and started happening in Europe, in Switzerland in particular. Ellen White says, I understand that Brother E.P. Daniels has, as it were, what has he done? Set time stating that the Lord will come within 5 years. So what was he doing? He was teaching that Jesus was going to come 5 years after this. So that would be 1892. Now, I hope the impression will not go abroad that we are time setters. So what did she say? She was hoping that people would not believe that this man represented the Adventist church. Right? So again, over and over, what we are seeing is that Ellen White and the Adventist church, our early leaders, were not in favor of time setting at all in any way, shape, or form. And then she says, let no such remarks be made. They do no good. Seek not to obtain a revival upon any such grounds. Now, what happened eventually is, in the year 1888, as you have, you've learned about it. I was trying to figure out, I remember, yes, Elder Luajo has spoken about this. You'll remember that there was an attempt to pass a national Sunday law in the year 1888 at the level of Congress. And when this happened, time setting exploded. Because now things that were foretold in prophecy were about to take place. They were standing, as it were, right at the edge of history, at the end of the world. And so what they started to do, the time setters just came out and just started shouting all kinds of dates and years. And what we're going to see, do you have another microphone or something? This is turning on and off. It's going on and off the whole time. So what I want you to notice now is you remember in the first time you see time setting happening, it was around it was 1844, right? The same year that the Great Disappointment took place, and it kind of stopped by 1851. So there was a moment of time setting in the first 10 years of our church, and then things calmed down for a bit. And then in the 1880s, in 1880, then there was a sudden resurgence of time setting. And then there was quiet for about 6 or 7 years. And then when 1888 came and the National Sunday Law almost took place, what you're going to find out now is that almost every single year there was someone setting a date. It went from like nothing for about 20, 30 years to now something that's happening every single year for almost 10 years straight, right? So notice, the year is 1892. Now, just keep this in mind. You know, if I say to you, take your umbrella with you, what does that imply? That rain is coming, right? So if I mention an umbrella, you automatically think rain. Or if I say, take your raincoat, you're thinking rain, right? If I say, wear your sunscreen or whatever, you're thinking it's going to be very hot outside, right? So the fact that you see Ellen White talking about time setting and saying, don't time set, what's going on? People are time setting, right? So notice, in 1892, she says, we are not to know the definite time, either for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit or for the coming of Christ. We are not to live upon time excitement. Then she says, you will not be able to say that he will come in 1, 2, or 5 years. Neither are you to put off his coming by stating that it may not be for 10 or 20 years. Right? So what were people doing? They were setting time. And some of them were saying it's in the next 5 years. Some were saying it's going to be next year. And others were saying it's going to be in about 20 years' time. And you notice that she had a problem with both of them. Both the ones who were saying it's very, very close, as well as the people who were saying it's far off in the future. Right? So Ellen White met this time-setting problem in the year 1892. Then again, in 1893, it says, let all our brethren and sisters beware of anyone who would set a time for the Lord to fulfill his word in regard to his coming. So again, what do you see? In 1893, the very next year, you see time setting is taking place again. Again, she says, false teachers may appear to be very zealous for the work of God and may expend means to bring their theories before the world and the church. But as they mingle error with truth, their message is one of deception. Now, I want you to notice something in this statement. What is she saying about the people who are going around setting dates? They're false teachers. So what does that tell you? How she views time setting. Is it true or false? It's clearly false, right? What else does she say about them? They're very zealous. You know, as I've kind of grown up in the Adventist church, I've only been an Adventist since 2008, but as I've grown and matured and I've seen and experienced things, I've noticed that oftentimes people who are wrong sound very right. People who are misled or deceived often seem like they've got the truth. So she's saying these are people who are zealous. They are willing to stay up late and get up early to promote these teachings. Right? But in addition to that, they put their money where their mouth is. They are willing to spend money, and a lot of money, printing and setting up meetings and doing all kinds of things to convince the people that what they have is the truth. But what does she say? Their message is one of deception. So what she's saying is that people who time set often seem very sincere, they seem very genuine, and they're willing to invest in it. And you think some people, based on how genuine and sincere they are, they think maybe they have the truth. But she's saying to us that this is deception, no matter how sincere and zealous they may be. Then she says they are to be met and opposed. Now notice she says, not because they are bad men. So she's saying that the people who time set are not necessarily intentionally deceiving us. They're just deceived. They are misled. So we're not to oppose them because they are bad men, but because they are teachers of falsehood and are endeavoring or trying to put upon falsehood the stamp of truth. So we are not to treat these people as if they are wicked men trying to destroy us and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, we have to confront them. We have to stop them from spreading these lies because they present it as if it is the truth, and it will deceive many people within our ranks. Then, you see the next date, 1894. The statement I just read to you, was from 1893. The first statement I read to you was from 1892. So year after year after year, you see Ellen White giving these statements. She says, God has not revealed to us the time when this message will close or when probation will have an end. So what was going on? People were setting time and saying the three angels' messages are going to be finished by this date, and this is when probation is going to close, and this is when the National Sunday Law is going to happen. And what was she saying? Stop doing that. God has not given us the knowledge of when these things will take place. Stop doing that. Those things that are revealed we shall accept for ourselves and for our children. But let us not seek to know that which has been kept secret in the counsels of the Almighty. So she's saying here that the time of the end, the time of the close of probation, the time of when the mark of the beast will have finished its work, when all have received the seal of God who are ready for it, when all these things take place, God has not shown us when those things are going to take place. And we should stop trying to guess or calculate when these things take place. She says, letters have come to me asking me if I have any special light as to the time when probation will close. And I answer that I only have this message to bear, that it is now time to work while the day lasts, for the night cometh in which no man can work. And what is she saying? Stop trying to calculate times and dates and do the work. What happens when people set time? They get distracted and they don't preach the actual message that God has given to us. Stop your time setting is what she's saying. Now, just now, it is the time for us to be watching, working, and waiting. Now, just now, it is time for us to be okay, I read that part. The word of the Lord reveals the fact that the end of all things is at hand, and its testimony is most decided that it is necessary for every soul to have the truth planted in the heart so that it will control the life and sanctify the character. What she's implying here is that those who get caught up in time setting, their lives are not going to be controlled by the truth. They are not going to experience sanctification. People who get caught up in speculations get distracted. So while she says we are not to set the time, she still says that the end of all things is at hand. So even though she says we don't have a set date, we don't know exactly when he will come, we know that it's going to be soon, so we better get the work done. Do you see the balance? So although we want to oppose time setting, we don't want to also make the mistake of putting the second coming and the close of probation way off in the future. But you can have a sense of urgency without setting dates. Are you with me? And what can give us the sense of urgency is what we see going on in the world, the state of the world, the signs of the times. That should be enough. It shouldn't have to be a date that gets us all excited and urges us on to do a work, right? And we'll talk about a little bit later on why it's a really bad idea to do this. So in any case, there is no command for anyone to search the scripture in order to ascertain, if possible, when probation will close. And people will spend years studying this stuff. They will look at the prophecy, the story of Noah, and they will calculate they'll study genealogies, they will go into history books, they'll do like a PhD in trying to find out when the end of the world will be exactly. And she's saying, stop wasting your time. Study the three angels' messages. Understand those messages, live those messages, and give those messages to the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? There are people who come with very complicated, apparently truthful arguments, which are all nonsense. She's saying, stop doing that. Are you with me? Now, some of you may wonder, why am I being so serious about this? I have a whole section on the dangers of doing this, and you'll see why God tells us to avoid this. God has no such message for any mortal lips. So if you hear someone saying that probation is going to close in this year or next year or whatever, that message is not from God, it's from the devil. That's what she's saying. And it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter how loved or how much truth they have preached in throughout their lives. It doesn't matter even if you have been won into the Adventist church through their influence. If they are setting dates, they are being misled and being used by the devil. Are you with me? Now, that doesn't mean that everything else that they have said is false. Right? Tomorrow, we're going to learn about the 1888 message. Ellen White said it was a message from God. Those same two men, Jones and Wagner, fell into deep apostasy. One of them became a pantheist, and the other one joined the Holy Flesh movement. And they left the church completely. And some people have, when they saw that, they said, surely all of their messages were not from God. Ellen White actually wrote in response, and she says, whether these men fall from the faith or not, the message that they bore at Minneapolis in 1888 is from God. So if you find people, genuine, godly people who have preached the truth, falling into time setting, don't make the mistake of disqualifying their whole ministry. Are you with me? What we do is we take statement by statement, message by message, and treat them individually, right? Because we can actually lose a lot of good gems of truth that come from these people if we make that mistake. All right, then in 1895, do you see the date again? What was the previous? It is 1894, right? So it's like 1892, 1893, 1894, now 1895. And just guess what's coming next? What? 1896, right? Sorry? I will, yes. Yeah, all of my content is freely available, no charges, right? You can come to me or you can go to the media team. I hope you like my slides. Ellen White says in 1895, we are not of that class who define the exact period of time that shall elapse before the coming of Jesus the second time with power and great glory. Some have set a time, and when that time has passed, their presumptuous spirits have not accepted rebuke, but they have set another and another time, but many successive failures have stamped them as false prophets. Right? Very clear, self-explanatory. We don't do this. That's 1895. Look at the next year, 1896. God gives no man a message that will be referring to the close of human probation, that it will be 5 or 10 or 20 years before this earth's history shall close. If it were 40 or 100 years, the Lord would not authorize men to proclaim it. God is not in the business of giving his people time anymore. 1844 was the last time, right? And we'll look at those statements in a moment. Look at the next year, 1897. You didn't believe me, right? Right there, 1897. We can see that which we have been talking about for the last 35 years, this law causing the Sunday to be exalted and making human inventions to take the place of God's holy day is now being fulfilled. What was happening in 1897? There was a Sunday law that was being passed, right? They were moving to enact a national Sunday law. Now notice, what does the last sentence say? There is much excitement now in regard to these matters. Now guess what started happening when they heard that the Sunday law was about to come? Time setting. The secret things which belong to God are to be left with him. But the things which he has revealed are for us and for our children. We are nearing the great day of God. The signs are fulfilling. So what is she saying? We are approaching. The end is near, is what she's not denying that. But then she says, and yet we have no message to tell us of the day and hour of Christ's appearing. Yes, it's close, but we don't know exactly when it will be. So over and over and over again, you see God's people falling into the trap of time setting. And every single time, Ellen White wrote out against it, saying, this is not of God. Stop doing it. Not even the National Sunday Law is an excuse enough to start setting dates. Stop it, is what she's saying. Be ye also ready, she says, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. The day and hour of Christ's coming is pronounced by lips that speak the truth and the truth only, to be beyond the knowledge of man. Right? So over and over again, Ellen White repeats the point that mankind cannot know when Jesus comes. Right? That's the year 1897. Guess what? 1898. Don't worry, I'm going to stop now because they stopped. In The Desire of Ages, she says the exact time of the second coming of the Son of Man is God's what? Mystery. We are not to know it. However, something interesting happened. Ellen White had her own interesting experiences. She was accused of being a time setter. And then later on, she was accused of being a heretic by the time setters. So she just couldn't win, right? No one really liked her, it seems. The people who didn't believe in time setting and the time setters, none of them liked her. So notice, she received a letter from some lady in the church that was basically saying that there are some people who are accusing you of time setting because of something that you wrote a few years ago, and I just want to know, is this true or not? That's what this is about. So this is Ellen White's response. Dear sister, you state that some claim, among other things, that there is dishonesty in suppressing your former writings, claiming that in your original Testimonies, Volume 1, which they have preserved, you distinctly declare that you were shown the day and hour of Christ's second coming. So what are they saying? What they're saying is that Ellen White had written and claimed to know exactly when Jesus came. But when he didn't come on that date, then she just scratched it out. She took out a Tipex and just wiped it out, right? She removed it and she reprinted it in an effort to basically cover herself up. So basically, that was the claim that they were making, that Ellen White had set a time, it didn't happen, and then she changed it and she said, we're not time setters, to try and kind of cover her tracks. Their argument is that this statement of yours will not stand the Bible test, as Christ himself declares that no man knows the day or the hour, not even the angels of God. Hence, you have withdrawn the first editions and revised them, leaving out the above, and also printed a tract declaring that we are not a class of people who set the time. Right? So basically, what they're saying is, at some point, Ellen White says, we have a time, we have a day, Jesus is coming on this particular day. It didn't happen, and then she's like, oh no, we're not time setters. And that's what they were accusing her of. So I don't have the whole discussion, the whole letter, but she basically says, would you mind asking these people to bring me that original manuscript where I actually said this? Because I'm not aware of it. She basically said, please present the evidence because I've never written such a thing. People basically were falsely accusing Ellen White. She says, I have no book and never have written one containing any such statement. But now listen to this. This is quite interesting. In my first book, you'll find the only statement in regard to the day and hour of Christ's coming that I have made since the passing of the time in 1844. It is found in early writings on those pages. In the present edition, all refer to the there are two. All refer to the three. They all refer to the announcement that will be made just before the second coming of Christ. So what is she saying here? She's saying that in the book Early Writings, just before Jesus comes, after probation has closed, during the time of trouble, the saints, as they are basically praying for deliverance from persecution, then they hear the day and the hour. Now notice, by turning to page 145 and reading from the beginning of the chapter, you will see that the statements made refer to the deliverance of the saints from the time of trouble by the voice of God. Right? So I've basically said that, and then she quotes it, and then she says here in the bold, as God spoke the day and the hour of Jesus' coming and delivered the everlasting covenant to his people, he spoke one sentence and then paused while the words were rolling through the earth. So what did God say? What did he speak? The day and the hour of Jesus' coming. So according to this, Ellen White saw in vision God speaking and saying to his people, this is when Jesus is going to come. Now the question is, how is this different from what the people were doing that she opposed when they were setting dates? Here's the answer. This section in early writings contains all that I have ever written, ever been shown in regard to the definite time of the Lord's coming. I have not the slightest knowledge as to the time spoken by the voice of God. Now notice she says, I heard the hour proclaimed, but I had no remembrance of that hour after I came out of the vision. Do you see that? So what's the difference? She heard the date, but once she came out of the vision, she could no longer recall it. So she wasn't able to say Jesus is coming on this particular time and hour. So she couldn't be date setting because she didn't have the date. She didn't have the time. She didn't have the hour. She didn't have anything. Do you see the difference? Does everyone see the difference? Okay, all right. There's some blank stares there for a moment. Now, as I said to you, Ellen White, not only, so in those previous statements, she was being accused of being a time setter. Now, on the other hand, this woman had a rough life sometimes. She was accused of being a heretic because she wasn't a time setter. I'll skip this paragraph and I'll read this one. I have been repeatedly urged to accept the different periods of time proclaimed for the Lord to come. I have ever had one testimony to bear, the Lord will not come at that period. And you are weakening the faith of even Adventists and fastening the world in their unbelief. So what was going on? These people who were setting dates and times, they would come to Ellen White and they say, Mrs. White, the Lord has shown us when Jesus is coming. You need to accept this. You need to approve this in your writing. And she says, no, this is not right. And she said repeatedly, over and over and over again. Can you imagine people like coming to your door and saying, hey, by the way, do you know Jesus is coming next year or something? That must have really gotten on her nerves eventually. But in any case, this is what she encountered. Every single instance, she refused. She says, this is not the Lord's message for his people. Now notice, the time setters have pronounced the curse of the Lord. I'm just going to switch this off. I guess you can't hear me anymore through here. The time setters have pronounced the curse of the Lord upon me as an unbeliever who said, my Lord delayeth his coming. So what did they do? Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but this is funny. Sorry. What did they say? They put a curse on her. They were like, you are cursed, Sister White. Why? Because you are saying the Lord is delaying his coming. Hey. Their oft-repeated messages of definite time was exactly what the enemy wanted. So who was enjoying this? He was sitting back eating his popcorn, watching Adventists cause havoc amongst themselves, setting times and dates. And Ellen White repeatedly had to use her own ink to express, this is not the Lord's will. Stop setting dates. This is fanaticism. This is from the devil, is what she says. And it served his purpose well to unsettle the faith in the first proclamation of time that was of heavenly origin. In other words, whenever these people set their dates and they came to pass and they didn't happen, people thought that's what 1844 was like. The time setting of 1844 was also just a load of nonsense. So in other words, as these people were going around setting dates, they were losing faith that God was in the Millerite movement of 1844. Ever since, okay, well, I'll skip that one for now. And then she says, I have also been pronounced a deceiver because I have said the Lord will soon come. Get ready, that ye may be found waiting, watching, and loving his appearing. Thank you, by the way. So, first of all, Ellen White was accused of setting a date. Then she was accused of being a heretic because she wasn't a time setter. And then again, later on after that, she was again accused of basically being a time setter because she kept on saying, Jesus is soon to come. So basically, no matter what Ellen White said, she got criticized. It's kind of like Jesus. Then she says, but in the Revelation, I read this statement, behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me. And again, jumping a bit, behold, I come quickly, blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecies of this book. Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast that which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. And then she asked the simple question, was the one who bore this testimony a deceiver because the quickly has been protracted longer than our finite minds could anticipate? It is the faithful and true witness that speaks, that is Jesus. His words are verity and truth. So what is she saying? I'm just quoting Jesus. When I say that the end is near and that the coming of the Lord is soon, I am simply repeating what Jesus has told us. Now, in our next session tomorrow, we're going to see why it hasn't come as quickly as it ought to have. It could have come very, very, very quickly. So the point that we're getting is that time setting is something that recurred repeatedly throughout the life of Ellen White, especially after the initial Sunday law, the attempt at a Sunday law in 1888. And people were guessing about the beginning of time of specific prophetic events, like the outpouring of the latter rain, the close of probation, and everyone's favorite is the second coming. And these people who did this often looked genuine. They looked sincere. They were zealous. They had energy and passion as they preached this message, and they spent lots of money, but that did not change the fact that they were wrong. Ellen White tells us that this pattern of time setting was not to stop in her day. What does she say? There will, what's the next word? Always be fanatical movements, false and fanatical movements made by persons where? In the church who claim to be led of God. Those who will run before they are sent and will give day and date for the occurrence of unfulfilled prophecy. What is she saying? Always, right up to the end of time, within God's church, there are going to be people who claim to be led by God, who may even sound like they've got the truth, who will be claiming that the second coming or some of these final events are going to take place on a particular date and time. So the question is, do we see this? Do we actually see time setting continuing even after Ellen White's death? Does anyone know who that man is? Okay. His name is An Sung Yong. An Sung Yong is a Korean, was a South Korean, and as far as I know, he is the founder of a movement called the Worldwide Church of God. They're also known as the Mother God Church. They go around teaching that this man is Jesus Christ, the second coming of Jesus Christ, and the woman that he married was the New Jerusalem, the Mother God. And he actually, from what I was told, he was actually a General Conference vice president in the 1930s or 40s, somewhere around there, and he wanted to become the General Conference president. And basically, when they said no, that bruised his ego so much, he went back to South Korea, he went into the villages, and he started preaching to the people that he was the second coming of Jesus. And he formed a massive following. So he died, though, so I don't know how they deal with that. But yeah, he did. He did die. So one of the movements that rose up after the death of Ellen White, remember, I want you to remember the statement. What did she say? Always. What will they always be? False and fanatical movements. So what are they doing? They are giving a day and a date for the occurrence of unfulfilled prophecy, and that would include even setting years. She's against time setting. She promises us, it's a prophecy that right through to the end of time, time setting is going to continue doing the same deceptive work. Now, one of these moments in Adventist history became known as the Days of Noah movement. It started in the 1950s and it ended in the mid-1960s. So basically, their reasoning was, they said that Jesus was sure to come on the 22nd of October in 1964. Now, you may say, 1964, where'd they get that date from? Well, their reasoning is quite simple. Noah received his call. He was basically told to build the ark and given a message to preach to the antediluvians that the flood was coming and that they needed to prepare to turn from their wicked ways and to find refuge in the ark. And he did this for how long? He preached for 120 years. So he was separated for his work. He preached for 120 years, and then the flood came and destroyed the whole world. So guess what they did? They said that in 1844, the Advent movement was called out of the world to prepare an ark, a place of refuge, to call the world to turn from their evil ways. And then, just like Noah, they were to preach for 120 years. Because the Bible says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will also be when the Son of Man comes, right? 120 years is given to the Advent movement. So you take 1844 plus 120, that takes you to the year 1964. Pretty simple, right? But it's also pretty wrong. The problem with this is that the phrase, as in the days of Noah, you remember this morning how Brother Ashley highlighted that context is very important, that the phrase where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am among them, he's not talking about establishing churches, he's talking about resolving disputes within the church. When you know the context, it solves a lot of problems. So if you know the context of this phrase, Jesus was referring to the condition of the world before the second coming. He was referring to the world, was the fact that the world was largely going to be unready for the second coming because of the lives that they were living. They were absorbed in materialism and in sin and so on and so on and so forth. He was not talking about timing at all. And one of the reasons we know that is because in the very same chapter, he literally says, but no man knows the day nor the hour. So to use Matthew 24 to prove time setting, it's like the worst thing to do, right? It's kind of like going to Alaska and trying to warm up. It's like, why are you doing that? Go to Botswana if you want to get hot, right? So going to Matthew 24, it's like one of the worst chapters to do time setting from, right? Now there's this prediction obviously failed because we are way past 1964, it's 60 years ago. The next major movement within the Adventist church rose up in the 1980s, and it was known as the Jubilee movement. So this one's a bit more complex. These guys were students, serious ones. So the event that they foretold was the coming of the National Sunday Law, the death decree, and the second coming. And they said that all of these events would take place on October 3rd, 1987. And the evidence that they gave, and it's a bit more than this, I'll continue in the next slide, they said that they referred to the Jubilee cycles in the Old Testament. They said that it is clear, we know as Adventists, that the plan of redemption, the different phases of Christ's work is symbolized in the Old Testament sanctuary services. We knew when Jesus was going to die because of the Passover. We knew when the outpouring of the Holy Spirit would take place because of Pentecost. We knew when the Millerite movement would take place because of the Feast of Trumpets. We knew when the Day of Atonement would begin because of the Day of Judgment would begin because of the Day of Atonement, right? So they said, based on that, we can also figure out when the whole plan of redemption ends. Just like with all of those other events, they were dates that we had. We had a date for the death of Christ. We had a date for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. We have a date for the Millerite movement. We have a date for the Day of Atonement, for the change of Christ's ministry, 1844. We have all these dates. So why can't we have a date for the second coming? Makes sense, right? So what they said is that there were prophecies within the book of Daniel that have a dual fulfillment. So famously, you and I know that in Daniel chapter 7, it speaks about the 1,260 years, or the times, and a dividing of time, in reference to the papacy and the time of supremacy that it had when it persecuted the church and it ruled over the world. They said basically that time prophecy has another end time fulfillment, a dual application is what they said. And then they jumped to Daniel chapter 12 and they found another two time prophecies, the 1290 and the 1335, and they said those also have a dual application. Now, just for the sake of explaining this, we know that the 1260 began in what year? 538 and ended in 1798, right? When did the 1290 begin? Sorry? Okay, I'll let you do your homework. But basically, okay, yeah. So I'll let you do some of your own research, but both of those prophecies end in the year 1843, 1844, right? The 1260 ends in 1798. These two other ones, they end in the year 1843, 1848. So you can do your calculations and jump back in time to see how that works out. So what did they do? They said that these prophecies, which have been fulfilled in the past, remember that's been fulfilled in 1798, Daniel 12 has been fulfilled in 1844. They said this is going to be fulfilled again. But then we know that when we interpret days, when we read days in prophecy, what does that mean? It means years. So this movement, the Jubilee movement, basically ignored that interpretation. They said that this is not 1,260 years. This is actually literally 1,260 days. It's literally going to be 1,335 days. That's what they said. The problem with that is that it's a total violation of the day-year principle, the principle upon which the Advent movement was founded. And on top of that, it was Jesuits who came up with the idea that a day is literally a day in prophecy. It was a man called Alberto Rivera who came up with what is now known as futurism. It's a false method of interpreting the Bible. So this method originated with the Jesuits, and it was being used now by people who claim to be Adventists to give a dual application to a prophecy that has already been fulfilled. Are you with me? So that's the first problem. Ellen White actually spoke about this. She says, some will take the truth applicable to their time, and what will they do? They will place it in the future. So in other words, there's something that has happened around their time, referring to the prophecies of Daniel, and she says they're going to take those same prophecies and throw them off into the future. Events in the train of prophecy that had their fulfillment away in the past are made future, and thus by these theories, the faith of some is undermined. Notice what she says, you are in danger, right? So what did she think? What did she think of the practice of taking prophecies already fulfilled in the past, taking them and putting them in the future? It's dangerous. It's a deadly thing to do, right? So we could have a whole lesson on futurism and why this is not a good idea. This is a very poor way of studying prophecy, but that's another study for another day. But the point is that all three of these prophecies, the 1260, the 1290, and the 1335, were to end on the 3rd of October in 1987. Now, they said that the 1335 began on what date? February 7th, 1984. They chose this date because it came between what they considered to be two major events in American politics. So this date, February 7th, came between the 10th of January and the 7th of March in that same year, 1984. And what happened on the 10th of January? The United States and the Vatican State agreed to establish diplomatic ties. The second thing that happened on the 7th of March was when the United States appointed an ambassador to the Vatican. So they basically said, these two dates sound important. Let's choose a date between them, and that can be the starting point for the 1335. Now, the question is, how in the world did they come up with these events? And why in the middle of these two? Since, like, where does that even come from? This is what I call hermeneutics, right? Or thumb sucking. This is like really, really making stuff up. So they basically had no reason for choosing the midway between these dates. They just basically randomly picked them to suit their dates, as I mentioned in a previous statement. Then in the 1290, they said that began on the 20th of March. And the reason they chose that date is because Ronald Reagan tried to introduce a school prayer amendment, basically making it law to have prayer in school before classes start. And when these people heard this, they're like, this is the greatest attempt in history to unite church and state. It's not. It was not by any means. But the irony is that it didn't even happen. It completely failed, right? But Ronald Reagan was not able to pass his bill. So, and then also, quite ironically, when you take 20th of March and you add 1,290 days, it takes you to the 1st of October, not the 3rd. So that's also a bit of a boo-boo for them, right? Um, then the 1260. The 1260, they said, began on the 22nd of April. And the reason they said that is because the Mass, the Easter Mass that took place at Vatican in Vatican Square, there was a lot of people there. I'm not joking. That was literally their reason, right? They said there were so many people there. There were like 300,000 people attending Easter Mass. Therefore, this is the beginning of Catholic supremacy over the world. That's literally what they said. You can't make this stuff up. But they did. So this prediction also failed. And sadly, most of the leaders of this movement entirely left the Adventist church. They no longer walk with God's people. And not only them, but the people who followed them as well. Now, there have been recent attempts at time setting. I've been told my time is running out, so I'm just going to have to summarize this. Famously, David Gates set the dates for the National Sunday Law sometime around 2015, based on the fact that the Pope came to the United States to address this, I think it was Congress. I was actually there in Washington, D.C. We were handing out The Great Controversy and other magazines when the Pope came. Now, remember what I said to you earlier on in this message. Just because David Gates made the mistake of setting a date does not mean that we should throw away everything that he says and has done. David Gates is one of the godliest men, I believe, that our church has. David Gates is a man that the Lord has used to bring thousands and thousands of people in South America and Central America into the ranks of Seventh-day Adventism out of the Catholic Church. This man may have his flaws, but he has definitely been used by God. And his stories are phenomenal. I would encourage you to actually go and listen to some of the miracles that took place in this man's life. He's a man of incredible faith, but unfortunately he fell into the trap of time setting. Another man, Devon A. Haupt, a local of South Africa, many of you may know this man. He said that 2024, this year, is the year that Jesus will return and the final events will take place. Again, I don't agree with everything that Devon A. Says and teaches, but I would say that he has had an effect of bringing revival, at least in some circles of our church. So I wouldn't throw away everything that this man has said. But nevertheless, I believe recently someone told me who was in close association with Brother Devon A. said that he recently changed and said Jesus is no longer coming because the Lord is merciful to his people. So, yeah. And then, why are you laughing? And then recently, there has been a resurgence of what is known as the cosmic week theory. How many of you heard of the cosmic week theory? That basically the world is going to end after 6,000 years. You've heard of this before? All right, so I'm going to address that idea tomorrow morning. We don't have time now. But basically, there are two dates that have come from the cosmic week theory. The first is 2027, and the second is 2031. And we'll see why there are these two. There are actually three possible dates that come out of this line of reasoning. So I'm just going to skim through this. But basically, Ellen White warned us seriously about the dangers of time setting. She says, as their hopes are again and again and excited by time setting, only to be destroyed, their faith receives such a shock that it becomes well nigh impossible for them to be impressed by the great truths of prophecy. What happens to people when they time set? Their faith is almost destroyed. Once it fails and fails and fails again, they eventually reach the point where you can no longer reach them with the three angels' messages. Do you see the problem with this? This can literally cost people their salvation. We cannot take time setting in any form lightly. I don't care who does it. Whether it is our beloved David Gates, whoever it is, we should not do this. Again, she says, those who persist in this error will at last fix upon a date too far in the future for the coming of Christ. Thus, they will be led to rest in a false security, and many will not be undeceived until it is too late. So what happens with some people? They set a date, like in about a year or two, it doesn't happen. Then they set another date, maybe a few years later, that doesn't happen, and then they get, okay, this is getting embarrassing. So let's just set a date far off in the future. But what happens? What happens when they set it far off in the future? They relax. They chill out. And she says they come into a state where it will be too late for them to be woken up. Does this sound like a joke? This is deadly serious. Now, listen to this. Those Jubilee guys, remember the Jubilee people that I mentioned? The 1260 and the 1290, those guys who were setting all those dates with Ronald Reagan and the Pope and everything? You know what they said afterwards? Colin Standish, the founder of the school that Brother Luajo and I went to, he approached one of the members of this group. And you know what the guy said to him? Yeah, we were wrong about the date, but we helped some people to come into the church. Notice what Ellen White says about that line of reasoning. I saw that God tested his people upon time in 1844, but that no time which has since been set has borne the special marks of his hand. So whose hand is on it? Satan's. He has not tested his people upon any particular time since 1844. We have been and still are in the patient waiting time. The 1854 time created a considerable excitement, and many have settled it that movement was in the order of God because it was extensive. What are they saying? It must have been of God because there are a lot of people. Since when are numbers a sign that people have the truth? Ask Noah. How did that go, right? Yeah, it was 8 people, right? And many, so they believed that it was true. Even though the date was wrong, they believed that it was true because there were a lot of people involved in it. However, such conclusions, she says, are not necessary. Then she says, there was much preached in connection with the time in 1854 that was reasonable and right. And I would say this about some of the time setters that I've mentioned, David Gates, Devaney. There were things that they were preaching that were right, things that were truthful. Some who were honest took truth and error together and sacrificed much of what they possessed to carry out the error. People who heard Devaney, people who heard David Gates were selling land and property. They were investing heavily in his ministry because they believed that God was with them. It says, and after their disappointment, what did they give up? What did they give up? Not only the error, but also the truth. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. And now they are aware it is very difficult for the truth to reach them. If you go to those people and you try to convince them to come back to the church, she says it's almost impossible. Some who endured the disappointment have seen the evidences of present truth and have embraced the third angel's message and are striving to carry it out in their lives. So there are actually some who have been positively affected by time setting. Can you see that? It's right there. But notice what she says. But where there is one who has been benefited by believing the 1854 time, there are 10 who have been injured by it. So is there some benefit to time setting? No, there is. There's one. There's one who will be benefited, but for everyone, there's 10. 10 times more people are being lost because of time setting. Does that sound like a good investment in preaching? Not only is it a waste of time, it's sinful. Because you are causing the eternal loss of souls. I've seen people excuse time setting before. Ellen White says it is inexcusable. Many of these are placed where they will not be convinced of the truth, though it be presented before them ever so clearly. Even if Ellen White herself was resurrected, and she could stand before these people and give them a Bible study on why the Adventist message is the truth, they would still walk away and say, no, not interested. Do you see what time setting does? This is something that we are to shun like leprosy. I'm not going to touch on this, but this is basically a section where I touch on a whole lot of quotes where Ellen White basically says that when the angel in Revelation 10 said there shall be time no longer, he meant that there is no more prophetic time. There are no more prophetic time periods after 1844. So anyone who comes and sets dates after 1844 is wasting your time and wasting their oxygen. Right? And and this is important. Listen, I know you've been listening to me for a long time, but listen just one more minute. When you read Revelation 10, you see the angel raise his hands, swear to God that there will be time no longer. No more prophetic time. And then the next thing you see is an announcement that the mystery of God is about to be finished. Do you know what the mystery of God is? It's the ending of the plan of redemption. It's the second coming. It's the resurrection, the end of the world. What is that teaching us? That teaches us that after 1844, there was no more reason prophetically to delay the second coming. In other words, before 1844, Jesus couldn't come. 1844 had to happen. Before 1798, Jesus couldn't come, right? 1798, the end of the 1260, it had to happen. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Those time prophecies prevented the second coming from taking place. After 1844, no more prophecies are delaying the second coming. Are you with me? So the question is, why has it been delayed? If there is no more time, why have we waited 180 years? Why? Do you know that Ellen White says that if the Millerites had followed on with the three angels' messages, that Jesus could have come in their lifetime, shortly after 1844. When the Lord says, "Behold, I come quickly," he meant it. But why didn't he come? That's what we'll be looking at tomorrow. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for this time that you've given to us and for the clear, stern, and yet loving warnings that you've given to us against the error of time setting. Father, we are all vulnerable to this. None of us are above falling prey to deception. We plead with you to help us, Lord, that our hearts may be right with you, that our minds may be right, our understanding of your word may be clear. And I want to pray for your leading men, your great men who have served you, like David Gates and Devaney, who have fallen into this mistake. Lord, we love them. We believe that they love you and your truth. We believe that they are your servants, but they have erred, Lord. And we plead with you to be with them, to continue using them as best as you possibly can, and also to help us not to stand as critics of them, but to learn from their mistakes and to avoid falling into the same. May your spirit of grace be upon us as we continue going throughout this day, and may you be with the next session and every other part of the program that is to follow. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.